If the silence between you and your person feels heavier than the caregiving itself, then this episode is for you. This episode is for those who are still reaching and wondering if their person after a stroke can still reach back to them. This is about what happens when caregiving replaces connection. We're going to name what disconnection actually looks like. We're going to walk through one shift that you can make, and we'll start and end with a story that might help you see your relationship differently. Many care partners are privately grieving what used to feel easy: presence, touch, connection, inside jokes, being asked how your day was. But this episode is about describing what maybe you've been experiencing, but you didn't really know how to describe it. You didn't know how to say what is different. And you've been surviving as a care partner. You probably had to make some pretty hard choices. You had to take on more hats. You had more responsibilities than you ever had before. And maybe you even had to put your dreams on hold because you didn't know if your person was going to keep surviving or what the future would look like. This episode is for you who want to get it back because you don't want that void in your relationship. Stroke survivors, if you are watching or listening to this episode, I hope it'll give you a little perspective about what your significant other might be going through. You are surviving, but know that you aren't going through this alone, that your significant other has their own struggles too. So I'd like to introduce you to a client I'm going to call Brian. Brian had returned to work after a year. He had been a high-level executive in a company. When Brian would get home from work, his wife would ask, "Honey, how was your day?" And he would invariably bite her head off. And then he'd retreat to another area in the house. And he would never talk to her. Can you imagine, like, seeing that, like as if it were a movie? How would that make the spouse feel? How was Brian feeling when he did that? So we would talk about it because he would come to sessions saying how guilty he felt, how bad he felt that he reacted that way. But he just didn't know how to get out of this reaction loop. He didn't know how to stop and breathe and answer his wife's question. And what this new awareness was bringing out for him was that he felt ashamed. And he had never realized it before this conversation we were having. He wasn't distant because he didn't care. He was distant because he felt ashamed. He felt like he ruined the best years of their life by having had this stroke, for which he had no responsibility. He had an undiagnosed heart issue that caused the stroke and led to aphasia. And in so many ways, he had nearly fully recovered, but it was that last little bit that really bothered him. So what we did in treatment is he came to naming it. Once he really put a name on it, that he felt ashamed, then he was able to start working through the grieving process. He was able to start coping. And it took a little bit of time, but he started opening up. And this tension that I would see when we would meet, this tension would start dissipating, session after session. Over just a short time, his shoulders relaxed and he became more confident. So how does the drift start? And I think this is where care partners might be thinking that they caused something, or, it was some circumstance that brought this drift between them and their significant other. It was a stroke, right? It was the stroke that came in between you, because when your person has a stroke, it's all about survival in those first few days, right? because the doctors have to figure out what's going on. Is there a risk of another one, or mitigating other medical conditions, right? There's a lot of layers, there's a lot of complexity to it. And because everybody literally is in survival mode, and because we know in rehab that those first 6 months of therapy are so important, that that period of spontaneous recovery has to be maximized at all costs for long-term recovery, that everybody is focused in on the stroke survivor. Nobody stopped to teach you or to tell you, the care partner, the significant other, the spouse, what was going on. The whole structure of rehab does not allow for much self-reflection, right? You're just trying to get through one day at a time. So this disconnect, it starts with logistics, doesn't it? So if you take it from this perspective, how does one stop to connect? How does one stop to think, this is the person I married. This is the person I'm spending my life with. We have a family. We have friends. We have goals and hopes and dreams together. You didn't ask for this, and neither did they. And then after a while, as this process just keeps going on, you're just trying to keep it all together. It's about being resigned to this new life, to this new thinking, to this new approach. And what you're calling avoidance might be fear. What feels like indifference might be shame. Just like Brian, where he was not answering the question when his wife said, "How was your day?" or "How was speech therapy?" She's just trying to open that door for connection, for that relationship that they used to have. And when he would shut her down and retreat, that was him avoiding. Does your person avoid? Something to think about, right? As Brian slowly released the guilt, as we started talking about how were the other ways that you and your spouse you used to connect? How did you connect when your kids were still living at home? What did that look like? And what he brought up was that they had this gratitude base. They'd keep it on the front table by the front door. And every day, each one would come in and they'd write something down and add it to the base. And what he was telling me, and it was amazing to watch how he relayed the story. Again, his shoulders were down. He was open. He was relaxed. His speech flowed. For a man that was working so hard to get his words out and to find the right words and to put the words together how he wanted them to be. When he was relaxed, the words flowed. So because he's relaying this story, it was so incredibly powerful. And on his own, at the end of telling me this story, without any prompting, he thought, we could go back to this. What he chose that moment was to start his gratitude practice again. So it didn't take too long. Again, just a few sessions, a couple of weeks went by, and he comes back to treatment and he's like, we've been doing it. I've been writing things down. And because my wife noticed I was writing things down, she started writing things down. And when the kids came to visit on Sunday dinner, they started pulling these pieces of paper out of the gratitude base. And this opened up a whole new level of communication. Not to say that it wasn't emotional. It was emotional for him and his wife and his kids. But what he was willing to do was work through those feelings, was to work to be present. And it all started with his gratitude base. It provided him a new perspective. From this day on, after that Sunday dinner with the kids and the gratitude notes, he started seeing his recovery from his wife's perspective. That's when real big changes started to happen, where they started talking about it, talking about his stroke and survival from both perspectives. And this is when the healing really happened. So it's about reconnection. It's about this drift that happens because there was a sudden medical event that put you into this trajectory that you didn't control. The wheel was already rolling down the mountain and you couldn't stop it. But now perhaps you're at a place that you can start making changes. This is where you can stop and breathe and think about what you want. Think about where you are and start reconnecting. So let's reverse engineer this. Think about in your relationship. How was it that you connected with your person? And I'm going to use the word intimacy, but by intimacy, I'm not meaning sex. I'm meaning, how do you sit on the couch and watch a TV show? Would you before sit where your elbows are touching each other? Would you drape your legs over his? Would you, I don't know, share a pillow or lean the same way or whatever it is? Whatever those simple connections that you did before the stroke, this is where we need to get back to. So recognize what that is and figure out from where you are now, how can you take small steps to doing that? How can you take small steps to reconnect with your person? Whether it's putting your hand on their shoulder and saying something like, honey, I love you, or, I miss you, or I'd love to sit and watch a show with you tonight. Something, some way of connection, whether it's verbal, it's physical, it's nonverbal, it's how all of you looks. This is the night to start doing that. Experiment. See if you can open that door. Because someone has to open that door. Maybe it's just eye contact at dinner. Maybe it's sitting next to the person at dinner, maybe not directly across, because sometimes eye contact can be intimidating. Maybe you choose to sit next to your person and you put your hand on his or you put your hand on his lap, just for a little bit of physical connection. You're not going to solve it in one contact, but you can start, right? So I was in a caregiver support group with care partners that I never met before. And what I find when I'm in this circumstance is how much I learn. And I wanted to share with you some of the quotes that I pulled from that experience. For me, from that experience, one of the spouses said, I wish he'd ask how my parents are. Another spouse said, I miss just sitting with his hand on mine. These aren't complaints from these care partners. They are quiet hopes. And they're not asking for a miracle. They are asking for presence. So here's your reflection question. What changed in your relationship? Not because of the stroke, but because of the silence that followed. The silence that followed the craziness of rehab ending. So here's your take-home message. What is one way you can show up for your stroke survivor this week? Show up as the relationship you had before the stroke. Can you sit beside them for a show? Can you say goodnight and pause? If you're going to sleep, would you rest your head on their shoulder or hold their hand or put your hand on their arm? What does that look like? Only you can answer this for yourself. Can you cook dinner and ask them to sit with you while you're prepping the meal instead of them being in another room watching TV? You're not rebuilding a performance. You're rebuilding presence. How does that land for you? You are rebuilding presence, but you have to take one step forward to do it, and you have to be aware. You don't have to stay stuck in survival mode. There is a path forward, but it begins with you believing that you're worth it, that this relationship is worth it, that there is something to bridge that gap, that silence you have with your person. So I'd like to tell you about Lisa and Elena. These are two care partners that started at the same place, but one stayed stagnant. She chose to do something different. This isn't about willpower, it's about tools. It's about not having to fake it on your own anymore. It's about you not having to do trial and error and take a stab in the dark and, well, maybe I get one more resource and I can figure out how to do it. It's about finding a community and a path forward that can help and support you and help explain some of these things that you might be experiencing. That's what these episodes have been about. It's about explaining the nuances of stroke recovery and rehab and the relationship between significant others. And it doesn't have to be a spousal relationship. It can be a sibling relationship. It can be a mom taking care of a daughter. It can be between, friends taking care of one another. But the lessons are still the same. How do you find connection? You don't have to stay stuck in survival mode. There is a path forward, and you are worth the effort too. If any of this episode landed with you, please check the show notes and check out the story, Lisa versus Elena. I think you're going to come away with some good insights. Until next time, listen for life and take back what matters.